or carnivore for to mimic caloric restriction and the benefits of exercise. I'm going to be talking about an article that is at medscape.com, and you can get to that article on my website, catherinetraining.com, or medscape.com. View article, Diet and Exercise Pill Are Real, How Mimetics Work. So I went carnivore back in 2018. I've been no sugar and low carb for many, many years before that. And it's interesting because when Ozempic and Mounjaro and these drugs that are the GLP-1 inhibitors, when the buzz started to come out in about a year and a half ago, I was reading the articles on them and I was like, wow, that sounds a lot like what carnivore does. So there's two things that are making Ozempic and Wegovy work, which are appetite suppression and then delaying gastric emptying. I'm like, wait a minute. Doing carnivore, as I research why it works, what I've seen is absolutely my appetite is satisfied by meat and animal foods. And then on top of that, I've been using apple cider vinegar and lemon juice for years and years, back before I went carnivore, because I noticed that whenever I used it, I wasn't getting hungry at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And now we do have evidence that apple cider vinegar does delay gastric emptying. And I'm thinking, well, instead of getting the injections and paying all of this money, I mean, why wouldn't you simply reduce carbohydrates to the point where your appetite is satisfied and then maybe take ACV? But there are many people who don't want to reduce carbohydrates that far. But now, on top of that, there's something else that's coming, and it is mimetics, mimetic drugs for caloric restriction and mimetic drugs for exercise. So in other words, if caloric restriction does help for weight loss, there's evidence that caloric restriction actually helps people live longer. That people who are eating about 25% less, there's evidence that they can get several extra years of life. And so they've been pursuing these drugs to try to mimic caloric restriction so that people wouldn't have to suffer and they could just get the benefits. And these drugs are becoming available. But what's really fascinating to me as someone who trains and who dances is the exercise mimetics. So CR, or caloric restriction mimetics, are one class of these drugs. But there's a fascinating class of mitochondrial mimetics. So I believe that one of the reasons that carnivore makes me feel so fantastic is that it's just supercharging my mitochondria. I can get so much more energy when I'm eating food than I can from eating a traditional diet. What if you literally could take a pill that is magically causing your mitochondria to behave the same way a mitochondria in an athlete would behave? And what's interesting is these drugs are actually already out there. How do we know? Because they've already been misused by elite athletes using them for dopings. So if I may read this to you, the future of exercise and CR pills. So the field has hit some bumps, some inevitable, such as otherwise healthy people misusing the drugs. An early experimental exercise mimetic studied by Evans and abandoned because it triggered, check this out, tumor growth in lab studies, is used illegally by elite athletes right now as we speak as a performance-enhancing drug despite warnings from the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. And the researchers worry that future caloric restriction mimetics and exercise mimetics could be misused in the same way. I think that what is devastating and really kind of sad is when you've got an exercise mimetic that literally causes cancer growth and is obviously dangerous, but that in elite athletes, they're using it anyway, and possibly it's being used in military applications as well. Because I suppose in the moment, when you really want to win a competition or possibly win a battle, that you might be willing to use these kinds of drugs. But these CR mimetics may work best for people who aren't carrying extra pounds, so they're not necessarily for weight loss the way that Ozempic and Wegovy are. So really, but the most important thing in this live today that I want to talk about, obviously, I want to direct people to this article themselves. Please read it for yourself, understand what's going on. But I think the greater question is, Number one, if we discovered that these drugs were safe, would you take them? I was clinically obese. Things were pretty bad. So when I got pregnant, I had just an explosion of weight gain. Everything just went haywire. I've always been glucose intolerant. I know that from having eczema as a child. But with my pregnancy, and if you don't know, I'll tell you, pregnancy, a healthy pregnancy, is a state of insulin resistance. It is that state of insulin resistance that allows us to grow that baby. But things went haywire with me. I went from like 125 to, there was a point at which in the doctor's office, I stopped looking at the scale, well up over 200 pounds, at least over 210 pounds. And then I had pregnancy-induced hypertension, which also, a lot of that was water and pitting, and they put me on bed rest. But the reason I'm so fascinated about this is that I had a healthy child 22, almost 23 years ago, and that is fantastic. But what made my system go haywire, and then why was it that after Colin was born that I only lost about 20 pounds? Like, I lost the 20 pounds that one would expect from the delivery, and then I had this stall. It would not come off afterwards until years later. And what I had to do to finally get the insulin resistance down, become insulin sensitive again, was just step by step. It started with weightlifting, building lean muscle, and then cutting sugar, then cutting grains, and then cutting vegetable oils. And then finally, that took all of the weight off with consistent training and consistent keto diet. But then menopause hit. And once I got into menopause, nothing worked but carnivore. So it was an animal-based diet that has kept all of the weight off. And did you know, by the way, that the research shows that the thing that harms longevity the most, the things that puts human beings at risk the most, is BMI variability. It isn't as dangerous to be overweight as it is to have yo-yoing weight. So the idea is, and I want to say, wouldn't you want to get lean, get healthy, and then stay that way? But the biggest problem that I saw when I was a personal trainer was that maintenance just isn't sexy. I mean, people don't care about maintenance that much. It seems to be that they're willing to pay the money. They will lay that money down and show up, whether it's showing up for an injection or whether it's showing up to lift weights or do intervals. They'll show up for weight loss, but they won't show up for maintenance until, what I'm seeing anecdotally and in the people I follow and in the groups I'm in, very often until they go with an animal-based or a carnivore diet, because what's happening is that this lifestyle really is not painful at all, even economically. I'm on a website on Facebook called Carnivore for Women, and a lot of the newbies will ask, well, what about the expense? My grocery bill is getting so much higher. But the thing is that everything else gets cheaper. I don't ever have to buy new clothes. I mean, I do, sometimes if something wears out, but I used to be getting new wardrobes all the time. I used to have like 3 different wardrobes. There were like, the skinny clothes and the medium clothes and the fat clothes at the back of the closet. This is not necessary anymore. And as a matter of fact, I'm selling a lot of those really nice clothes that I don't wear anymore, selling them on Vinted.com. And then also, I don't need to go to the dentist as often. I never, ever go to the doctor. I'm 59 and I'm not on a single pharmaceutical. I do take my apple cider vinegar, but that's it, nothing else. And so this is where the money savings comes from. But the last thing, and the third thing I want to talk about, and one of my biggest concerns, is the connection between pharmaceuticals, health, and livestock, eating meat. Because one of my concerns is that I keep saying, have compassion for carnivores. I need to eat this way in order to survive, because even more of what carnivore does for my physical appearance, for my physical health, the most important thing that carnivore does is it keeps me mentally healthy and mentally stable. And I want to mention Dr. Georgia Ede's book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, is out now, and it's explaining some of the connections between reducing carbohydrates and toxic foods and mental health. And there is a section in there about quiet carnivore and how a carnivore diet can quiet your mind. It certainly did mine. But my concern is I know that I need an animal-based diet to be happy, healthy, and productive. But there is concern that there seems to be a creeping movement to reduce access to livestock. I'll give you an example. There's something called the Blue Zones Project that's very prominent downtown in my community. And they are literally going into different businesses, and it's run by Adventist Health. And they're going into businesses, to different restaurants and cafes and coffee shops, and saying whether or not certain menu items are Blue Zones approved. And this approval is supposed to be an important, way of getting more people into your shop or into your business. So it's definitely being tied to economics, and even the Chamber of Commerce is involved. And my great concern is, certainly I always say, be well and eat for yourself. And if people want to follow a vegetarian or a vegan lifestyle, whether it's for faith-based reasons or whether it's for health reasons, of course they have that right. But my concern is if somebody like me says, I need to follow an animal-based diet, that with the arrival of these mimetics, is that going to create an argument of, well, actually, no, you don't, because you could take this injection or take this pill instead of eating livestock, which has led me to go deeply into research about just what the truth is about livestock and the climate. And I'm not all that far. I'm in the Sierra foothills. I'm not all that far from UC Davis, where Frank Mittelhoner is. And I believe they call him the sod father. But his passion and his mission is dealing with the dairy and the livestock industry here in California and worldwide, and really addressing, all right, how much in climate is livestock responsible for? What is methane responsible for? And what are we going to do about managing methane? Anyway, I love his work, and I'm so excited that he's here in California. And they are finding ways to feed cattle that do reduce methane production. And one of them is feeding them seaweed. It's pretty amazing research that they're doing. Another thing that shocked me that I found out as I started to do my research trying to understand the impact of livestock is, can anybody guess which country in the world has the most cows? Does anybody know who has the most cows? It's India. And the reason why, and of course, this is, people's faith. People have a right to practice their faith the way they want to. But the reason there are so many cows in India is because they're sacred. But there's more cows in India than the US. There's more in Brazil. But I think, and there's more in Asia in general, not just in India, than there are in the United States. But I must admit, and if Frank Mittelhoner says it, I kind of believe that it's true, that we need to look at the reality that yes, a lot of methane does come from cows. But something else very exciting is coming up, and I hope that you will look for it. So the satellite has already been launched, but there is a satellite that has been launched to look at methane and to find out once and for all where it's really coming from. Because yes, livestock is a source of methane, but so is oil and gas production. So we're getting to the point where we can figure out where the methane is really coming from, and then we can manage our behavior from there. Because for me, it's time to be candid and tell the truth about the fact that it is an animal-based diet that's keeping me happy, healthy, and sane and productive as a human being and as a member of society, doing good things in society, if I do say so myself, making a difference, volunteering in my community, and doing work that's important as well. But then again, I have a history. My family, we were in the quarter horse business, and we did run cattle because we had cutting horses. And so we would have them for a brief period of time in order to train our horses on them. Because cattle, they get pretty smart, and they know how to avoid and, manage what the horses are trying to do with them. And then we would, feed them for a certain amount of time and then pass them on and then bring in a fresh set of young steers that were the right size to work with our horses. And so it's interesting because what we were feeding them is we were feeding them cottonseed hulls. And you start to get this understanding about how livestock do fit into the food chain, and the way that they do very often eat and live on and get nourished on byproducts of other things that are grown for agriculture, and how they do fit in and how they do benefit the ecosystem. And then here in the county that I live in, livestock are important. And then finally, in terms of philosophy, my mother's ancestors came here to the United States during the Great Famine in Ireland. And if you study the Great Famine, people were being pushed out because they were starving. And years before that, when there was a great deal of conflict between England and Ireland, Great Britain and Ireland, there was a statement made very clearly that if you want to get rid of the Irish Catholics, get rid of the Irish people, just kill their cattle. Because it turns out, in a very similar way to the way I eat, the bulk of the Irish diet, the bulk of the calories, the nutrition that was coming before the potato was actually coming from dairy of all kinds, fermented dairy, sour dairy, curds, and that the cow, that dairy was so incredibly important to the survival from the poorest to the richest. As a matter of fact, the noble people of Ireland, when they would foster their children, they actually had a contract on how much butter those kids were supposed to get. So the parents who were, sending their kids out to other noblemen to be trained, it was like, hey, you take care of my kid and you make sure that my kid gets plenty of butter. But the idea was that the way to get rid of the people was to get rid of their animals. So I think, even if somebody watches this podcast and they're avoiding animal foods because, they care deeply about, animal welfare, realize that there is a long history in people who have been moved around, that very often the reason that we ended up as refugees and had to settle somewhere else is because we lost access to livestock and to animals. The point being that it was technology that my ancestors, my Irish Catholic ancestors, had not developed the kind of battle technologies that would protect them from the invaders. And there was really a sense for the longest time that might equals right, and that you have right to the property that you can take and hold. And so when you look at people of Irish heritage, Irish Catholic heritage, the way we were moved out because we were hungry. And then also, I do live in ancestral Miwok lands. And the Miwok Rancheria, which is what they called reservations here, has become very prosperous because there are 2 casinos now here. And now they're taking our money from us, anyway, creating jobs within the community. But the reality is that one of the ways that their livelihood was taken away was this understanding, especially in the Great Plains, that the way to get control of the land was to remove the animals so that the regular diet and subsistence of the people who were originally there would be taken away. And so it definitely was used against my ancestors. And I just want to make sure that we continue to have access to the ability to raise livestock. And I'm so grateful to people like, the folks at UC Davis that are working diligently to find ways to keep livestock and dairy a part of our food system. So that is my Candid Carnivore for today. And until next time.